Hey, welcome back, everybody.
Hey!
It's Sunday night, and it's about 2 or 3 minutes after 7.
And we're back.
Hopefully everybody's doing good tonight. Had a good weekend. I know Danny was on the water. I was. Yeah. So, did you paddle around a little bit?
I did.
You and the wife? Catch a few fish, did you?
I did.
That's good. So give us just a second here. We're going to share quickly here on Facebook, and as we always do. And we'll get rocking with tonight's show. And we've got our connection set with our guests. So we are just about ready. How many times did you get on the water, Dan? Just the one today?
Yeah, just today.
Okay. I actually spent the 2 days up north, so that was good. I had to leave this morning. I didn't like that. But hey, that's the way it goes.
Right.
All right, let me turn this down just a little.
Send it over there. Give me another second. It's over there.
Hey, Andy Everhart, what's going on? Deb's on. Tony. All right. You ready to get this thing started tonight, Dan?
Almost. One more share.
Jason Radecki. Hey, guys. Had a blast up in Escanaba at the National... Hey, you made it up there to the National Trappers Convention. Good deal. I wanted to go. I knew it was this weekend, but...
Oh, it was back in Escanaba?
Yeah. Actually, Randy Duncan was going to go, but he wound up going to Indiana instead. So, yeah, I would love to have went up there. Might have to get you on here soon and talk a little bit about that, maybe. But I tell you what, Jason, you better duck, because last time I looked, there were some thunder showers headed that way, and I know at deer camp we're fixing to get hammered. So,
all right, I'm good.
Okay, here we go. Stand by in 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to another episode of the Up North Journal Podcast, everybody. I'm host Mike Adams, sitting in the cabin on a Sunday afternoon with Dan DeFall.
Sunday evening, not an afternoon.
Well,
it's evening.
It is evening,
but it's still daylight.
It feels like afternoon. I've been traveling.
Yes, you have been.
Have you noticed something lately, that it's getting darker earlier now?
Okay. I noticed it in the morning.
What's up with that?
And it's getting towards that time.
It is, and I don't
Fall.
I don't like it. I don't like it one bit.
You know, and that's the thing. Driving into work at 5 a.m.
Right.
Kind of see the sunrise. It's starting to be darker and darker.
Right.
You know where it's going with that.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. So, hey, you want to get right into it tonight?
You know, we got a guest on. It's straight from Wisconsin.
Yeah, what part of Wisconsin?
The middle of Wisconsin.
The middle. Right smack dab in the middle?
I guess.
Okay, well, this is a good friend of yours, so I'm going to...
Actually, I've known him for quite a long time, and kind of a... We've gone back to last year talking about it, and he used to be the editor of Deer and Deer Hunting, and I got fortunate to hunt with him, and been friends kind of ever since. And
I'm going to get the picture of that magazine cover. I'm going to put that on one night.
You can. You should have seen... I should bring over the photo that he sent me. He called me a Lions fan.
Okay. Well, that's fighting words, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Pat, what's going on? He's talking bad about you here, man.
Yeah, I must have forgotten that he's not a Lions fan.
No, that's okay. It's something us Lions fan have to endure, a lifelong sentence.
Right. Well, none other than Pat Durkin is on tonight. Welcome to the show, Pat.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Hey, you know, it's always good to talk with you and find out what's going on in your little part of the world, because, you know, you're doing a lot of writing and writing, hunting, and running.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's what I do. I've been doing it since I was in my late 20s, and I'm coming up on about 40 years now as an outdoor writer. So, yeah, it's just what I do.
What's new in the world of Pat?
Well, summer's flying by, and I'm about 5 weeks away from going back out to Idaho for my annual elk bow hunt. So I'm looking forward to that. And
But last year, you connected.
Yeah. It doesn't happen very often. I think the area I bow hunt has about a 15% success rate. So you figure if you get one every 6-7 years, that's about the average. But I've done better than that the last couple. Let's see, since I got a bow in 2014 and one in 2017. So, but before 2014, I went almost I think 8 years without getting one, so I guess I was overdue.
So 2014, that was actually over in Idaho, right?
Right. Yeah, I got two. Actually, last year I got 2 elk. One in Idaho with the bull, and I got a late season. I drew a late season tag for Arizona. So I went down to Arizona the first week of December. Last few days in November, and then I think the season started December 1st last year, and I got one on opening day down there. So I had a good year.
The Idaho hunt you've been going on for. Are you going with the same group of guys? Is it a annual event?
Yeah, it pretty much ends up being me. I'm the only stalwart, and then I have one good friend that goes along most years, but he doesn't hunt. He just comes along to fish and hang out in camp and go for hikes and stuff. And but as he and I are both getting older, he's spending more time in camp and less hiking, but he still gets up the hill to help me pack things out if I get one.
That's a good friend.
Yeah, great friend.
Definitely.
That is awesome.
I don't take that for granted.
Well, okay, I'm looking at a couple of photos here we've shown so far. There's the 3 of you gentlemen sitting there with you're sitting there with antlers. And you got a gentleman sitting next to right. It looks like, I don't know, is that a shed that he's holding in his hand? Or
yeah, he picked up a mule deer shed.
That's kind of what I thought it looked like. And then the other gentleman next to you with his bow. But that's quite the tent setup you guys got there.
Yeah, that's a Crua tent. I think they're made in Ireland, and we've had that in the last couple of years. It's basically a small garage when you get it all set up. It's about, I think it stands about 7 feet tall, and so I'm only 5'8", so I have no problem standing up in it. But Chris White, the younger guy there, he's probably about close to 6 feet, so he likes having the extra headspace too.
Okay, well
that helps.
I don't think Danny would have a problem standing up in that tent. I had to go there.
Oh yeah. You gotta pick on Danny.
Right, and it's awesome that you keep going back out there, and you've connected now twice in the last few years. But Idaho, you're out there, you're bow hunting, and you said you're going to be out there in September?
Yeah. I always go out for about 2.5 weeks. I always set aside 18 days, 4 days for 2 days to drive out, 2 days to drive back, and then 14 days on the ground.
That's quite the plan, I tell you. That's a lovely country, it looks like out there.
And how long have you been going to Idaho?
I started that hunt in 2006 with the first 2 guys I went with in 2006. One's now deceased, and one I just lost track of. And then most years it seems like we always have a little bit different group, but on the last few years I'd say it's basically been 3 of us. This year I might pick up another guy that joined us for the 2011 hunt. He might be coming back this year. So we try to be flexible because there's lots of country out there. It's not a problem of accommodating people. It's just but as you guys know, it's hard to get any group of people together for one specific time and one specific spot.
Right.
It's just always a struggle finding a group of guys who can all get loose and then also get loose for 2 weeks. So like the way this group has been working out, Chris White, the youngest guy in our group, he usually flies in during the second week that we're there, and then he rents a car and drives up from Salt Lake City where he flies in. And then I made it a policy now where Chris can't. He's either got to come in and help us set up camp, or hang around and help us break down camp. Because a couple of times I've broken down camp by myself. If they're sending him home, that ends up being an all-day job. So
right.
I put a stop to that. I use it. One good thing about getting older is you can use it as your excuse.
Don't let the young guys leave without doing work.
Right.
Right.
Well, now I got to assume that this is all a DYI type style hunt. I mean, you guys are hunting public land. You're getting your gear in and everything. Looking at getting provisions in for 2 weeks. How do you deal with water?
We're lucky because we camp right on a creek, and so we can just go down to the creek and dip these. These, I think they're called katydid water filters. They hold about 5 gallons of water in each one. And then we just set up a little. I bring my game card out every year, and I set the game card up and hang the water bags off that, and then filter the water out into a couple of those 5-gallon plastic jugs, okay. And then we just take the water from there.
Okay. What do you think that, I mean, other than getting everybody together and getting out there at the same time, like you just mentioned, once you get there, what's the biggest challenge that you have to overcome, there in camp?
As far as hunting, or
well, just setting up camp and everything in camp life. Not just getting out hunting, but short of going out to the field to hunt. I mean, what's maybe something that somebody that's looking to do this, might not think about and have to overcome? It's something they need to really pay attention to.
That's a good question. A lot of stuff you kind of learn by trial and error, and luckily I kind of done the camping over the years, so you know what to prepare for. But I know, like, we went the first year without things like camp chairs, and we found that, you can sit on coolers, you can sit on logs, all that kind of stuff, but it is nice to have something to sit in. So we gotten a little more fat and happy the last couple of years. We try to make it easier on ourselves. But, the one thing that really comes in handy for us is that game cart. We use that to, like, where we are, we go in by boat and take about a 3-mile boat ride down the river, and then sit up in the spot. And you could the area we're hunting, you can't get into that specific area by road. It's illegal to use ATVs and anything motorized, but you can come in from the one side by boat, but it's kind of a pain in the butt, so not many guys do it.
So you're coming in strictly by boat with everything?
I'm sorry?
You're coming in strictly by boat to set up camp?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we haul we haul my wooden boat out there, the cedar boat, and also an old 14-foot regular fiberglass boat, just one that we can car top. I put it on the top of my truck, and then we have like a little engine we put on it and put our way across.
Okay.
Down. So, yeah, but it's one of those fun things that you. I think the reason it works for us is because not many guys are willing to, pack everything in a couple of boats and then haul it down the river, and then go up on the other side and set up a camp, a quarter-mile away from usually where we have to park the boats.
Okay.
And so when you do that, you just kind of cut a lot of the local competition out too.
It's not like going in, hiking in, a quarter mile off a main highway and setting up in a tree stand like a lot of people do.
No, it's that's one thing that's when you hunt out west, it hits you right away is how when you hunt deer in the Midwest, typically you're just doing short walks, and if you walk a half mile, that's a long ways to walk for whitetails usually. Mm-hmm. We're out in elk country, walking for an hour and a half is nothing unusual. It's just to get into the area where you start hunting each day, and then being on your feet most of the day. It's a real good workout.
I would say so, and that's probably why you do as much running as you do.
Yeah, I started. Well, I should say I never went elk hunting until I got into shape, because I had enough sense to realize that for most of my life I was not in good enough shape to hunt high elevations and hunt all day like that. And I'm 62 now, and I started working out and losing weight about 12, 13 years ago. And then I started running in addition to that, starting in 2007. And then that running kind of became a good excuse to it was a good way to stay in shape. And then I found that throughout the year, it's kind of a fun thing to do. It adds a little challenge to your life just to run regularly, pretty much year round.
Well, Danny and I, when you said run for fun, we just looked at each other like, "What? That's fun?"
Well, I should clarify that. I have a former brother-in-law. He died about 5 years ago. He was a big cyclist. He liked to ride bikes, with his buddies in these different races. And the one thing he said to me is, every time they pass runners out in the road, they always notice that the runners never look happy, whereas bicyclists typically smiling back at them, and runners are always pretty much just kind of grimacing and waving. They don't smile too often. So yeah, that kind of describes me. And I can't say that running while you're doing it is all that fun, but it is something. Like today, I went for a long run this morning at dawn, And for me, being a guy with a long lifetime history of asthma, I always find it refreshing later in the day after you've had a good run that my lungs feel so good. You know, I can actually draw a deep breath, and then pretty much the only thing that really keeps them clear like that is to run. So in many ways, it doesn't feel that great while you're doing it, but later on, it feels good. And then on the bigger picture, I know if I wasn't running and working out regularly, I could never hike up this one mountain we go up each day to hunt elk.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, you talk about cyclers. I can tell you, cycling's not fun either. I've been riding a bike for about 3 years now, not near as much as I should this year, and it's not fun either. But I understand what you said though about, you know, afterwards, once you kind of get yourself back together, you feel better, you feel energized. It feels like you can take those deep breaths. So.
Oh yeah, and I find that even for doing what for my job is basically sitting at a computer screen all day in my basement office. I put in really long days behind a computer, and I find though that I stay more energized and alert when I've been running and working on a regular basis. And I remember back in my days at Deer and Deer Hunting magazine, where basically I got fat and out of shape over the years, and I used to always have to take a nap or sneak a nap somewhere, you know, right after lunch, and then sit back down and work the rest of the day. But now, in recent years, since I lost weight and got into shape, I just don't have that need to take afternoon naps anymore. At least not now.
Mm-hmm. It's a no nap kind of guy.
Right.
So Idaho is totally public land, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I tell you, Dan, that's one thing. Yeah, I've been blessed with all my life, as I've always had access to places to hunt, and then you get out west and you realize, man, that's some real access out there. I mean, there's places out there that I know I could walk to each day, but there's so much other country I'm hunting that I've just haven't had a need to go exploring other places. And typically when we have new guys come along, I try to send them to a new place to give us some reconnaissance, basically, to see what else is out there.
Using the new guy. Nice.
Yeah.
I tell you what, we're going to take a step out for a break.
Okay.
But when I get back, I got a couple questions for you about public land hunting in Idaho.
Sounds good.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We come back, we're going to continue the conversation with Pat. We'll be right back after this. Okay, for those of you on the live stream, hang tight here. If you've got any questions
for Pat, whether it's about hunting, it's about riding, it's about anything outdoors, Pat's the guy to answer them.
Absolutely. Okay, 1 second here and we'll get going.
Okay.
Okay, Dan, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back. Second segment of the show. Sitting here talking with Pat Durkin, writer and editor. Put those two words together, didn't I? Talking a little bit about hunting, talking about his running, and been out to Idaho.
Been out to Idaho public land hunting. But the question I have, being public land, have you ever gotten there and somebody been in your spot?
Fortunately, not really. You know, one time, though, I think, well, for the first 6 years we hunted in this spot, we never saw anyone in our particular camping spot. In 2013, as I was pulling in, I looked there, and here's a guy had a tent and a boat, right? Not where we camp, but close enough to where I just didn't really feel comfortable, you know, carrying all my stuff past his campsite and up to the next spot where I was camped. And it kind of, you know, it was one of those times where I thought this might be a good thing. I mean, I've had cases when I used to hunt the UP years ago. I can always think back to a time that I was sitting at a deer stand that I'd spent all this time getting back in there. This is back in the days before GPS units and stuff, and I was really proud of myself for finding this, what I thought was a real private spot. Then about an hour after dawn, some guy came walking along and sat down at the base of a tree about 50 yards away and never even saw me, never acknowledged me. And I walked over and talked to him a little bit and realized he'd been coming there every year forever. So I was backed out, and then about 2 hours later, I killed a buck somewhere else. And so I was trying to keep that a happy thought where here's this guy that's sitting in the spot that I've been using for 7 years, or close enough to it where I didn't want to intrude. So I thought, well, I knew there was a spot about another 2 miles down the river that I looked at I think it was in 2007. I went down there, looked around a little bit, and just decided it was too far away to dick around with. So I motored on down there and pulled up in there and ended up being about a quarter-mile hike up this creek bottom to find a decent spot to camp. But once I got there, I looked around and I thought, this might be a good thing. And one thing I liked about it, once I figured out the area a little bit, was there was no access trails going through that area. Whereas our spot, one of the attractions of it was that the campsite I had was only about 100 yards away from a well-maintained hiking trail. And hiking trails, as you guys know, if you put a trail somewhere, everyone eventually wants to walk down it. And so we had people dropping by the camp, and then people always kind of coming in and out of that area quite a bit. And this spot we're in now, I only know for certain of 2 other guys I've ever seen in that area where we hunt, and that was just kind of that was pretty far from camp, so I can't complain. It's just one of those things where you're bound to bump into someone every now and then. But no, not very often. It's just a real unusual thing.
Well, being that far out and remote and not really bumping into people on a regular basis, have you ever been in a situation where you thought you might have to call for a little bit of help, or are you worried about those types of things?
Yeah,
how do you prepare for it?
Yeah, I really I'm not a risk taker. I don't like feeling like I'm taking unnecessary risks. I really understand the idea that you can get in trouble real fast in big places. Like, I know when I fish Lake Michigan, I'm real careful about going out there without a real good review of the weather from various sources. I also take along one of those personal locator beacons when I go out on the Lake Michigan. I do the same thing when I hunt Idaho or up north when I'm off the road and back in places where you don't always have cell phone service. And these personal locator beacons, they cost a lot. At least they cost a lot more than when I bought mine. Mine's nearly 10 years old now, and I'll probably have an upgrade at one of these years. But yeah, I just really I'm careful because I guess in my opinion, you guys, I think odds are, if I were to get in trouble and have a bad accident, it's probably going to happen at home or near home, because I spend most of the year near home or at home. Mm-hmm. I know one winter, just a year and a half ago, I took a nasty fall on ice where I was going to a restroom on a highway wayside of all places, and my feet went up from underneath me and came down the back of my shoulders, and luckily it was my shoulders and not my head.
Right.
Because I hit so hard that I didn't break anything, but my shoulders were messed up for a good 6 weeks where I could barely swing my arms because it hurt so bad. So I think of that, but the thing about hunting elk country out in Idaho, the area we're in is really steep. So when we come down that hill at night, I take my time, and I bet you I don't come down that mountain a whole lot faster than I do going up it. Because we time it, and coming out, we get back to camp in about, it takes it from this one spot we usually start from about an hour and 15 minutes walking out, but to get there in the morning it takes about an hour and a half going up. Mm-hmm. But it's a steep country, and if you when you come down the hill with a full pack on when you're carrying meat out, which we've done a few times, it's really one step at a time and keeping your weight balanced, because it won't take much, and you'd be rolling and busting ribs. So I don't tell my wife a whole lot about that, but
Great.
Because I'm lucky I have a wife who cares.
Right.
And I know she's worried the whole time I'm gone, but it's trite but true that your biggest risk of any hunting or fishing trip is always the drive out and the drive back. I think it'll always be that way.
Absolutely. Just making sure that your life insurance policy is paid up when you're leaving
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and speaking of, you know, public and us being on Facebook here, we got a couple questions that are rolling in for you.
Okay.
About your writing, a matter of fact.
Okay.
And one question from Scott Tabor is, how long or short should an article be for a freelance or / amateur writer?
Well, it really depends on your market. I write a weekly newspaper column that goes to 17 papers here in Wisconsin, you know, from Green Bay to Madison to Wausau and all points in between, basically. And that one has been, for many years, it was 700 words. That was kind of the standard column length. And then when the USA Today network kind of expanded my column into all 10 of their newspapers here in Wisconsin, they said I could beef it up a little bit if I want. So now those average about 1,000 words. Now for magazine pieces, like American Hunter is one of my main magazines to write for, the NRA's hunting magazine. A feature article there, a full-length feature, is about 2,000 words. And then they had this one department called First Light. I think those average around 800 words. So it's really all about being in touch with the editor at these different magazines and outlets, and just letting them dictate what the word count is, and then sticking with it. If they tell you they want it to be this long, there's a reason they ask for it to be that long. And these days with the online sites, they're a little more flexible, of course, but even there, it's I started writing one now that will be going on the Meat Eaters website starting in the fall, and they've been having me, you know, put some in the can for them so they have a bunch of them ready to roll when they start their new operation, and those are going to average around 1,000 to 1,100 words probably.
Okay. And another question from Tim Cius. I've always wanted to write a book about turkey hunting. Should it be a book with hunting stories relating to hunting situations, or a story-style hunting book?
Well, that's a good question, because I've never written a turkey hunting book, and I really wouldn't. I would have to do some checking into it myself to really know what would sell. You know, these days too, the book options are much more than they used to. You know, it's one of those sad things where you don't have the book publishers like you had early in my career, where they're wanting to. You know, 20 years ago, you could sell quite a few books if you were willing to go out on the circuit, basically, and give talks and show up at these hunting seminars and hunting shows and peddle your own books. And these days, though, I mean, with the Amazon and other on-demand printing operations, you know, a lot of guys are doing e-books. A lot of guys are doing these self-published books. Other ones are doing the print-on-demand type approach. And so it's really changed a lot. And I'd say the biggest thing, whether you're writing a book or a newspaper column or anything else, it really just has to be well-written and tightly written, and really should, I mean, most guys can't afford it, but most books that I've seen really could use a good editor. And that's where I've made a lot of my money over the years, is I'm a good copy editor, where, I can't stress enough about the importance of tight writing. A lot of guys think you can just crank a book out, and chances are if you're just cranking out a book, it'll read like that, and you might sell a few copies, but most people will, you know, if you aren't getting that word of mouth endorsements from basically anyone who picks it up, it's hard to keep those things going. You know, it's just it's a tough way to make a living. I mean, writing books has never been something I've really pursued, because it takes a lot of, for most people, it takes a lot of time to write them, and I just find that magazine and newspaper stuff is more of my liking.
You know, you're talking about books, talking about writing now, and newspaper, magazines, and the internet, the way things have changed. I got to imagine your job as a writer / editor has really changed with the advent of digital media and the way things are still changing today.
Oh yeah, it's, you know, I've often realized, I mean, I've often thought about the fact that without realizing it, I was riding the back end of a wave throughout my career. When I was in newspapers back in the 80s, working full-time at the Oshkosh newspaper here in Wisconsin, we were always worried about why the number of subscribers kept going lower and lower and lower, and we all, of course, you assume it's something you're doing wrong, and or something the paper boy is doing wrong. Maybe the people aren't getting their paper delivered on time. All these things that we try to control,
Mm-hmm.
And despite all of these different meetings, and our eyes called circle jerks of people beat themselves over the head about all the things we're doing wrong. No matter what we tried, the newspaper world just kept getting smaller and smaller. And then at the end of 1990, I took that job at Deer and Deer Hunting magazine, and in 1989, Deer and Deer Hunting magazine had 166,000 sales between subscribers and newsstand sales. Their average was up in the 160s, 170s. You're really doing phenomenally well. And it never got back up there ever. It just dropped and dropped and dropped. And again, you go through all this. Are the covers not interesting enough? Is it the content? And you're beating yourself up, having all these meetings, and what can we do to get our subscribers back up there? And then you look around and you realize, well, the entire damn industry is shrinking that way. So maybe it's not just us, but then you think, well, what can we do different to get it back up there? And then you look back with the benefit of time and hindsight and realize, well, what we didn't realize was that the world was changing. People's reading habits were changing. A lot of people just weren't reading anymore. They really were settling into their TVs for the night and not reading the newspapers and magazines like they used to. And then along comes the internet in the late 1990s, mid-1990s, late 1990s. And again, I think most publishers were skeptical that this isn't going to go anywhere. And even now, 20 years later, a lot of the internet sites still don't know how to make money at this. And so it's really a process of trying to stay afloat all the time. But the one thing we always know is that people have always consumed information, whether it's spoken, whether it's written, whatever it might be. So eventually we'll find our way again and probably find a way to make money at this. But some people are finding ways to make money, and other people aren't, and it's just it's a constant struggle. And luckily, I've always had enough things going on in the different worlds, and enough demand for my stuff in the different worlds where I can always keep going. I've never, as a freelancer now, I've been freelancing since 2001. And it's been I think my most productive years that I work at it. I work almost every day of the week on something. And I think if you don't, if you think you're just going to ride along and everything's going to come flowing in, it just doesn't work that way. You have to keep pounding every single day on something. So, and like right now, I spent all day today at copy editing stuff, and tomorrow I'll be writing. Yesterday I was doing some photography stuff, looking at things I photographed last week and trying to make sense of them and what is worth saving and what I should just dump. So it's it's one of those things where I'll try to help people get into things and give them advice and everything, but I have a hard time encouraging them because I know how hard it is to make a living at this.
It's interesting. In my industry, in the television industry, the same things happened, and you get new kids coming in, and you're like, really, this is what you want to do? You don't want to discourage them, but it's hard to make money. And you talk about working every day, trying to make something go. I know Danny and I were constantly on the phone talking to each other about what we're going to do for the week. You got to come in, you got to build graphics for the show visually, you got to put together pictures, you got to put together video. It's like you say, you just don't sit down and crank it out. It doesn't work that way. But
no, I tell you guys, I often throughout my career I pictured myself sitting here with an invisible person standing next to me holding a gun to my head and saying, you will write today, you will do this today, and because if you don't, you won't last.
Right. Exactly. That's and as the world changes, you got to figure it out quick, because you can't go stale for a while or else you're going to sink.
No. You guys have been to the ATA show a number of times, and I've been going to the SHOT Show and ATA show since the early 90s. And the one thing I've always kept aware of over the years is that you might not think you're getting much done at those shows sometimes, but if you aren't there, if you aren't showing your face, you aren't in there plugging away trying to get work, you're soon forgotten.
Absolutely.
And
That's right.
if they don't see your face, they think you're no longer working. And yeah, some guys are happy just doing part-time work or whatever it might be. But for me, I'm just not in any big hurry to retire. I like what I do. I've been lucky that way, and I just find it satisfying. And I'll never be rich at this, but I do feel like I'm making my mark. I'm covering issues I like covering. I'm getting. I like the fact that I'm covering issues that a lot of people want to read about, and that's always been my forte. I've never been a writer who's gotten by on the how-to stories, because I always, I'm really rambling here, but I often think of Charlie Alsheimer, who made a living as a photographer and writer for Deer and Deer Hunting magazine mostly, but also for other hunting magazines. And Charlie used to always say, there's about 4 ways to kill a deer. And all we're doing is, all some people are doing is finding different ways to say those 4 things. Basically it's stand hunting, driving,
Exactly.
Show you how bad I am. I just, I look at that and I think, there really isn't a whole lot to this. I mean, for me, it comes down to persistence and being out there enough to have some feel for what's going on in the woods.
There's only so many ways you can spin it.
Yeah, right.
So
I always found that I always find it's more intriguing to write about the people who hunt and the reasons they hunt and the issues that go in and out of hunting, because as you guys know, I mean, you see it in Michigan, I see it in Wisconsin, we see it around the country, there's always politics involved in hunting, and
Absolutely.
People might, they might gnash their teeth about that, but I think, well, this is the country we live in. It's a democratic society. You show up and you vote, and how you vote will dictate how many things go, and if you don't like that, well, that's too bad, but that's just the world we live in, and I find that world invigorating, but some people don't.
Exactly, but you know what? We're going to step outside again, and then you're going to take us on your Arizona hunt, because you're going to tell that you said that's a good story. So we're going to step outside, and we'll be back after this.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll be right back after this message. Okay, those of you on the live stream, hang tight here for 1 second. And we want to get into you talk about politics and things that make the industry go. I want to talk to you, Pat, a little bit about the article you wrote with the West Nile and CWD. If we can touch on that briefly towards the end of the show.
Yeah. Okay.
All righty. Save this one off.
Billy Hoffman says, self-publishing is the way to go to keep control of your hard work and pay for an editor.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, exactly. That the editor is what makes the world go round. All right.
Right, Dan?
Yep.
All right. Here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back. Third segment of the show. We're still talking with Pat Durkin in Waupaca, Wisconsin via Skype. So before we went to break, Dan was talking about the Arizona hunt.
An Arizona hunt. He said he went to Idaho, got one with a bow, but then ended up going to Arizona last year and getting one with a gun.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's something to that, because you had to do a lot of things by yourself.
Yeah, that was kind of, I can't throw my buddy under the bus, but a friend of mine that was going to go with me decided about 2 weeks before, or 10 days before the hunt, that he's looking at the forecast and worrying about how cold it might be, and he's a little bit older than me, so it's not a concern I take lightly that, sitting in a tent for 10 days in cold weather it can get kind of hard on you, and I thought I was ready for it, because I brought along I was ready to bring along a heater, which I did, and a propane tank to keep the tent warm. So I thought I was accounting for all that. But anyway, I ended up driving out there by myself, and I know you guys have probably heard of Randy Newberg. He's a hunter and podcaster and TV guy from Montana. Well, I knew Randy was going to be in the same general area, so I just basically made sure he was my emergency contact. And so once I got out there and got my camp set up, I let him know where I was. So he had the GPS coordinates. So if my wife couldn't get a hold of me, she could contact him and come looking for the body, or if I disappeared. So I had that taken care of. But I still had intermittent cell phone service. I found this one point I could get out on and get a cell phone signal out. So I tried calling Penny most nights I was out there, which ended up being a short hunt. I got the elk on the first day of the season. But yeah, the biggest thing in those kind of hunts, frankly, is the drive out. I mean, that's a long ways to drive by yourself. I think it's about 1,500 miles or so one way. And but one good thing about in that hunt, I wasn't dragging a trailer though. I just had it just on in the back end of my truck.
Well, so you get out there, you get set up. Mm-hmm. You said first day of the hunt. Okay, so take us through that. Was it a morning or an evening when you got the elk?
Okay. Yeah. I should have. I don't know if you wanted me to keep rolling or not, but I got out there and I got my tent set up, and then I arrived. The season opened on Friday morning, and I arrived probably Wednesday morning. By the time I got my tent set up and basically everything out the way I wanted, it was late afternoon Wednesday. So I went started walking down these different ridges that I was camped on top of, just to check them out, with binoculars. And I saw one elk that afternoon, and I spent the whole next day branching out from there and scouting around. And I found a spot late in the day on Thursday that I thought, oh, this would be a good spot to basically set up a little sniper nest and just wait them out on Friday. And that's what I did. I watched from the one side of this rocky outcropping, facing into the sun for the first hour or two. And then when the sun just got to be too hard to look into any longer, I moved to the other side of the spot. I probably went about 50 yards and sat down the rocks on the other side. And I sat there. I saw a couple of bulls about 10:20 and 10:40 in the morning go across the opposite hillside, which is about, I think it was probably close to 250 yards across there when I ranged it. So it was definitely a doable shot, but I didn't get a good look at either bull to where I was confident they were a bull I wanted to shoot the first day. And then so I kept sitting there, and early afternoon, it was one of the coolest sights I've ever seen while hunting. There was this, it was like early afternoon, so the sun was high in the sky, and all the sunlight was a real bright day. The sunlight was just kind of bouncing off the underbrush and all the shrubs and anything else I was looking into on that opposite ridge. And as I was glassing with my binoculars, I was going through this one patch of brush, just kind of sweeping through, and all of a sudden here in this patch of brush was what looked like an X-ray of a bull elk just sitting there. But it was just all it was the way the light was hitting the brush, the way the light was refracting around the antlers and the head. It was just kind of white, kind of like I say, it almost looked like an X-ray, the way everything just kind of sitting there. It was just really weird. and then it would disappear, and when it would disappear, I finally realized it'd be because the bull was turning in a way where it wasn't reflecting the sunlight the same way, and so you just weren't seeing that image. Then it swung its head back again, and all of a sudden here's that skeleton again, just sitting there in the brush, and I could tell by the outline of the antlers that in that quote unquote X-ray. Mm-hmm. I thought, now that's a bull I'd shoot. It was pretty wide, it was tall, it wasn't like a monster, but it was probably like I'm not great at judging any bull or buck off on the hoof, but I was guessing it was in the 340, 350 range, and I thought, well, if I get a chance at him, I'm gonna shoot him. So I ranged him, and he was just at 280. But I had a bipod, and I had a good, nice, solid rest. So I thought, if I can get a chance at him, I'm gonna take it. Well, but then that was like about 1:30. I think I watched him for at least 2 hours, just kept an eye on him. And then about 3:30, I saw something move farther down the hill, a little bit closer to me, and it was still on the opposite ridge, though. Right away, I recognized it as one of the bulls I'd seen that morning. He must have been bedded down right after I saw him, and he had a real white coat. And this time, when he stood up and was walking around and feeding, I got a broadside look, I got a head-on look, and I got a going away look. And by the time I got the going away look, I thought, I'm going to shoot him if he steps out, because he looked pretty good. I think he ended up scoring around 330 or so, and I'm just not going to pass up a bull like that on, knowing that if I passed him up, that might be the only bull I see all week, for all I know. And so he took a couple more steps, and I got to my head my bipod on him, and I have one of these vortex scopes, so you can set the basically, once you're sighted in, you can just crank it to the exact range and hold that on. And so as soon as I had an opening, I shot him, and my bullet, I was shooting these Barnes X bullets, and it went down in a heap. It was just a real satisfying. You could actually hear the thump, come back across the canyon after I shot. Well, he went right down. I could see him on this hillside laying there, and I could tell he was almost dead when he hit the ground. But then once he died, a couple seconds later, his body like relaxed, and when it relaxed, it just started sliding down the hill.
Oh no!
And I don't know if you read my newspaper account of that, but he all of a sudden he just kind of disappeared, and I thought, what the heck? And then just by the time I was registering the fact he disappeared, his head reappeared, and then just kind of stood straight up. His nose was straight up in the air, and it was like his antlers locked onto something, and it popped his head straight up. And so I took a mark on this. It was a big dead juniper tree across the way, about 30 yards left of to the would have been west of where he died. So I locked onto that, because it's always fun how when you climb down from a tree or climb down from a hilltop and get down to where you shot, everything looks so different. So I had enough sense to make a good mark on where he fell, and then that tree got over there. And well, here I learned about a half hour later when I got over there that he'd rolled right into a big hole where a tree had uprooted, and when the tree uprooted, it brought the root system up with it and left this big gaping hole in the ground. That's where he tumbled into. And I'm pretty good at cutting up elk and cutting up deer. I've been doing it all my life, and right away I realized this elk is not coming out of there the way I normally do things, because he was, I couldn't budge him. I was all by myself, and so I just had to basically cut him apart piece by piece to get him out of that hole. And so I started working on him at about 4:30. I think I took some pictures, and then by the time I got done taking my pictures, it was getting dark out. And so I started working on with a headlamp and my two knives, and I got finished at about 1:30 in the morning.
How far away from camp are you when you shoot this guy?
I was, as a crow flies, about a mile, and I was all, where he fell was all downhill from my truck, so I knew too I'd be, hiking back uphill all the way to get him out of there. But yeah, it was, and actually where I hunt in Idaho is a much tougher extraction. But this was the toughest. This is the hardest I've ever worked to get an elk cut up. Because I couldn't just bone up the one side, flip them over, and bone up the other side. I had to kind of cut. I had to pull his guts out through his chest cavity, because I couldn't. He was so far down this hole that I couldn't pull the guts out through that hole, because it just would have piled up and made a mess down the hole. So I figured out if I take it's kind of like a DeLorean car. You had to take that, flip that rib cage up and pull them out, that way. So that was the high point.
The photo that we're looking at that you sent us, he's laying in that hole, I take it.
Yeah.
And that's the juniper tree that you talked about that fell over.
Actually, the juniper tree was a different tree, but the one that fell over, yeah.
I guess.
I don't know. It's one of those things where right now I couldn't tell you if it was a Douglas fir or a lodgepole pine or what tipped over, but it was.
But it's a hole he's in. Definitely a
Yeah.
hole. You can see he's down. I wouldn't know what to do as far, like you said, as far as trying to gut something like that down in a hole. You're not going to pull them out.
It was a new experience for me. I had to, everything I did, had to think about first. You know, like I realized usually I do the gutless method where you just take the legs off, take the neck apart, take the back straps off, and then reach through under the back straps and make a little hole and reach inside and pull the tenderloins out. Mm-hmm. I've gotten pretty good at that over the years. But this case, I couldn't do that because the bottom rear leg, I could not get to. I knew I had to take the guts out to get to that bottom leg. Mm-hmm. And so the only way to get them out was through the chest cavity, though. And like I said, there's always things that just, you don't normally do things that way, but, you know, you look at your options and figure out, well, how can I do this? And, you know, bit by bit, I got them out of there. But that was like, there's times it was just like stacking bricks. You cut a piece off and put it on top of the hole, and because I put a tarp out on top of the hole, and just, you know, cut a piece of meat off, stack on top of the plastic, to cut another piece off, stack on top of the plastic, and eventually you get down to the lower end of that elk, and then finally by that time I could flip them over and get that final piece out of there.
Jeez, oh Pete. You know, speaking of getting the meat out and back to your truck, one of the questions we're getting from Charles Byram from Iowa, is there ever any problems that you run into transporting your game back across so many different states?
Not if, like in my case, when I come back from out west, the only bone I'm bringing back typically is just a skull plate with the antlers. And I've only killed myself 3 bulls myself. My daughter shot one year, so that's 4, and that's the only bones we were brought back. So you have to, you know, I think most states now, I can't keep all the different states straight on what their requirements are because of CWD. So I just bring back boned out meat now.
That's probably the easiest way to do it. That way you
just bone it out and you're done with it.
Well, I'll tell you what, speaking of CWD, let's take our last break. We come back. We'll talk a little bit about that article that you wrote about a little bit about CWD and West Nile virus.
Okay.
All right, so let's step outside real quick. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. We'll be right back after this. All right, we'll save this one off. Any more questions, make sure you guys get them in here. All right. It'd help if I spelled this file the right name.
It usually helps.
I need about one more keyboard here, and that would help things.
Yeah.
All right. You ready, Dan?
I'm ready.
All right. Here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back. Last segment of the show. And we've been talking about hunting out west with Pat Durkin. And before we went to break, we just touched a little bit about transporting animals across state lines and those things because of CWD. But Pat, Danny tells me you wrote an article recently about how West Nile was affecting birds here in the Midwest and some of the things that are going on. You talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. In Wisconsin, and I think pretty much the pattern held up across the Great Lakes states, northern Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin, where grouse numbers are down last year. The harvest was down. And here in Wisconsin, we had a pretty heavy push by our Wisconsin Conservation Congress, the citizens body that advises our Natural Resources Board, to cut our grouse season down from basically cutting it in half and ending it before right basically at the end of November. And I wasn't real fond of this because I thought, not many guys are hunting grouse in December and January unless we have evidence that would somehow hurt the population. I really don't like cutting hunting opportunities away from people. And so I contacted the grouse experts over in Minnesota and also in Michigan to see if those states were looking at reducing their hunting seasons for rough grouse, and neither of those states were doing it. So I wrote a column basically questioning why our state's Wisconsin is so willing to rush into cutting a grouse season in half when there's really not a whole lot of evidence here that we're going to be endangering the population. Because the speculation is that the reason the grouse dropped off is because of West Nile virus, and that might prove out. But as I wrote in my column, one season does not usually give you a good trend. It's usually not a good trend indicator. It might be the start of something bad. It might be a fluke. You really don't know. So I just thought that was kind of unusual for our state to be, I thought, rushing into things a little bit, and especially when we're just now with these 3 states working on a long-term plan to get a handle on West Nile virus and its possible impacts on rough grouse.
Yeah, your article, when Danny was telling me about it, I have to say I haven't read it, but to me, West Nile, I've never really associated West Nile with grouse, and we hear about crows dying over here in Michigan, and
right.
On the news it's like if you find a dead crow or blue jay, that doesn't look, if it's just laying there and nothing's killed it, report it so they can test it. But I've never really thought about game birds.
Apparently it can do it. I think it was Pennsylvania did some work on this, so it is possible. And I wouldn't. The point I think I tried to make this point in my column is that no one really knows for certain right now. They might be right, but our agencies always get accused of where they get into trouble in the long run all the time is if they try to go away from the science. Mm-hmm. And we always talk about following the science, but hunters are very quick too often, I think, to ignore the science and just go with the gut. And biologists try not to do that, but oftentimes they have no choice but to do what lawmakers and appointed board members tell them to do. So I still think, though, for year in, year out, we're safer and more consistent if you just follow the science. The science isn't always perfect. Science is always evolving. Our knowledge is always increasing or changing, but at least it's a system that has a little history. That if we stick with it, we'll be right more times than we're wrong. And I guess that's my approach when it comes to all wildlife.
Going back to equating it to possibly shortening the season, and because of the West Nile, was there anything that went into looking at maybe weather and nesting if they had a bad nesting season?
Yeah, that was interesting too. Is some folks said that we had some really bad weather in the late spring this past year, not this year, but the year before. Another one said, it's no worse than usual, but it doesn't always take a whole lot in some situations to knock these birds back, and so that is one good possibility. But the one guy who I really respect him. I don't agree with him on this one, but I do respect his observations, because he's a well-schooled guy. He's a veterinarian, and he was the one calling for the shorter season. But he said these birds. He thinks these birds were there on the ground and doing okay once they're beyond the critical stage of their nesting period. And then by the end of the summer, they just weren't there. Guys going out early with their dogs for a little training weren't coming across many grouse, and there was worry by late summer last year that they weren't seeing the grouse they expected to see based on the drumming surveys and based on they do these brood counts every year that were showing pretty decent numbers in the late spring, but then all of a sudden they're gone. So. Mm-hmm. Again, no one has real good explanations for any of it, so that's why I still am skeptical that we're going to achieve a whole lot by shortening the season.
Right, exactly. As a matter of fact, last year, my cousin's brother-in-law and his friend that usually come up in October to do their grouse hunting, they left after midweek because they just weren't seeing the numbers. And a few years before that, we were having a grouse dinner by Thursday. And they had, and so you think could it have to do with the cycle?
Well, the point I made in my column was that based on the cycle, we should have been hitting our peak for the grouse cycle, I think, next year and the year after.
Okay, all right.
So I guess if we get to the next year and the year after, we're still seeing really small numbers when we were climbing. Then you have to think that something is going on here. But I guess even then though, I'm skeptical that we really need to shorten the season because, as you guys know, and most hunters know, is if the grouse really aren't there in enough numbers to make it fun, well, the hunting pressure is going to drop right off anyway.
Absolutely.
So it's just,
Well,
plus I always think in the big picture, this is a bird who really goes up and down no matter what we do. The hunting isn't what controls those numbers or changes the population much. So it's grouse are going to do what grouse are going to do, and the hunting is just basically compensatory. It's just not something that's going to be really additive to their mortality.
right, exactly, and it's funny that goes with grouse and it also goes with deer.
Yeah, you guys have been dealing with CWD over there as well, a lot longer than we have.
Yeah.
Where do things kind of stand right now, with the hunting community as far as what's going on in your state with CWD?
I can't say for certain because I'm one of these guys who I think I have a decent feel for it, but I've been wrong before. And anytime you are doing polling and sociological work to really get the pulse of the people, it's hard to really know for certain how people are feeling. But all I can say is based on my feedback from people over the years and how it might change, there's definitely more awareness of it now than there was just 5-10 years ago, because now the disease has been really going up fast. I mean, in the areas where it was first found, it's really been skyrocketing down there. Right now, there's quite a few areas in southwestern Wisconsin. I can think about 4 of them off the top of my, I could pull up the maps and show you sometime. Basically, if you shoot a buck that's 2.5 or older in a lot of these areas, it's a coin flip whether or not it's sick. It's basically a 50-50 chance that it's got CWD now. It's gone up that fast, and when you have at the same time the doe segment, the adult doe segment of the population, they're running at about 30 to 35% infection rates, and so it won't be much longer. And I'm based on what I've been told by the biologists, we will start seeing declines in the deer population down in some of these areas.
Are you seeing or hearing of hunters that are getting so discouraged that they're leaving the state and hunting somewhere else?
I don't know if you can say that, because I still think, like in my case anyway, just using myself as an example of who I've spent, where I hunt in southwestern Wisconsin is right on the edge of that CWD area, and like I get all my deer tested, and I still have fun hunting deer. But I have to say, it does change your thinking. It does when you kill a deer and you look at it. Typically you can't tell they're sick.
Right.
And I should tell you this one story. Just this past February, 6 months ago, I spent a day and a half with a DNR research group in that area. They've been netting deer and using these drop nets and using cage traps to catch deer, and then put radio collars on. And the very first afternoon I was down there, they dropped this. The first netting they did that night was on. They caught 2 bucks in this drop net, and then they quick ran over there and they hold them down and they give them a injection to basically knock them out for a half hour or so while they work on them, and they collect a rectal biopsy, a little piece of flesh out of their anus, and then they can test that for CWD. And both these bucks, one was a 2.5-year-old and one was 1.5. I learned just last week that both of them had CWD, and you couldn't tell by looking at them. I couldn't tell the naked eye that these deer were sick. But one thing I learned in this first full year of research is that the bucks the deer that did test positive for CWD, they were dying they're dying at 3 times the rate of a normal deer in that first year. They probably get more susceptible to other things, whether it's predation, whether it's losing their senses and not being as alert to vehicle collisions and not being as alert to hunters. Whatever it was, that they die at a much higher rate once they have that disease. At least they did in this first year of results.
The areas that they're testing, is it predominantly public lands where the outbreak is?
Yeah, where the outbreak is the worst right now. It's mostly private land. There is some public land intermixed there, but it's mostly private land.
Okay, well,
it's basically farm country.
With that being said, the hunters there are their perception of it and working with the DNR or the Natural Resource Commission there, or whatever your governing body is.
Yeah.
Are they pretty open to that and saying, okay, I think I got a deer on my property that might be sick. You might want to check. I've killed one. Because Danny and I, we've talked a lot here. The way things seem to be kind of working, and the attitude that they're taking with it is, I'm afraid that it's going to get to a point where hunters are going to start keeping their mouths shut, because it's like, whoa, wait a minute. If we find one in this new area, all of a sudden this becomes a hot zone, and they're going to come in and take our deer.
Right.
At what point do we? We capitulate and work with them.
Well, that's definitely happening. That's definitely been happening, and that's been one of the biggest, I think, black eyes for the hunting community is how little cooperation has been in some areas down in southern Wisconsin. And basically anywhere where CWD shows up or where the DNR wants to test, there's not always good cooperation. We had a case. Well, right now, you guys, I think I might have the numbers a little bit wrong, but I think when I ran my calculations back last fall, I think on the gun season, I think my final numbers showed that only about 7% of the harvest in some of these CWD areas was being tested, which means 93% of them are going home without a test. And when you're flipping a coin to determine the chance of those deer being sick or not, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that we're having literally thousands of deer going home in the freezers and refrigerators untested and being fed to people. And right now there's no evidence of this being a human health risk. But the thing I will always say is, well, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that for me, being a 62-year-old guy. And the incubation period on other similar diseases typically takes a long time in humans, and I'll probably die of something else before it would get me. But I'll be damned if I want to feed that to my grandkids and be responsible for being the first one. There's just so many things about this disease right now we don't know, and so you ride the fence, not wanting to sound hysterical. But at the same time, when you can't say for certain what is going on with the disease, do you really want to take a chance when it involves your young ones in your family? Right. And I think that's where I'm at. I just can't be that cavalier and that certain that this won't cause a problem, because the thing we saw in England with the
mad cow
disease is that they had some of their elected officials going on TV to eating hamburgers from their cattle, saying, "See, there's no problem. Everything's fine." Well, 20 years goes by, and things weren't fine. And really, we've only known a CWD in Wisconsin for 17 years now, so we don't. There's a lot of things about this disease we don't know, and we might not know in my lifetime, because it's not like we can just move in with our best scientific minds and figure these things out. I mean,
exactly.
Look at I always say we've been working with cancer for centuries, trying to figure out cancer, and this is with people that can tell you where it hurts. A deer, how much communication do you have with a deer? You have none. So it's really a lot of supposition and testing, but you're right though. The fear here is that we're not getting the cooperation I think we should be getting. People are, they'd rather be in denial than be helpful, which is not going to help things.
Yeah, the things that I've kind of noticed is the people who tend to kick up their heels a little bit are generally, the guys who hunt their own property and and I'm not trying to paint anybody into a corner here, but I think when you belong to an outdoor organization, put any acronym you want out there, whether, I think people that belong to these hunting groups are a little more educated on things, and they're more willing to give information, or willing to help, or willing to try new things and come up with a solution and work with people to make it a better place. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Before we let you go here, two things that Danny and I have talked about, and I don't think we've mentioned them on the show, but when we start looking at things out in the wild or even in the agricultural areas, a farmer, he's planting, his hay. He's got his hay out there, and you got deer in the field, right? Okay, they're doing their thing, and if it's in a CWD area, he cuts that hay, and maybe he doesn't have cattle, but maybe he sells it to a farmer 30 miles away, and the prions are in the ground, and they say now they can come up through. So now we're transporting plant matter around.
Yeah.
Okay, so where does that fall into line at? And I'm not trying to paint anybody into a corner here. I'm just saying this is something we've thought about, and I'm sure if we've thought about it, other people have too. And the other thing is deer water. They've got to have water. Danny brought up the fact that there's some people out there now that are building their own watering holes.
Oh, yeah.
And when you do that, do the prions get into the water? And do they survive in the water? Do they go down in aquatic plant material? Can it jump species into, say, ducks or other birds?
Raccoons, bears?
Yeah, or even fish. I don't know. I'm saying this thing to me, it looks scary. I hope it's not scary, but I think there's just so many things, like you said, we just don't know about. And where do we draw the line, and where does it stop?
I wish I knew that. One thing to keep in mind too is that these aren't living things like bacteria or viruses. It's they aren't alive. And that's, so they can sit in there in their it's a protein basically that just it's not a living thing. You can't heat your meat to a certain temperature and kill it because it's not alive to start with.
Right.
And so that's one of the challenges. But but you're raising all these questions that are great questions because we don't know. The one speculation is always that, well, these deer are walking around and they're urinating and defecating on in gardens on human food all the time, and could that be spreading it? Could that potentially get into the human food chain too? And I always find it interesting that our worst areas are also an area that provides a lot of the great produce for farmers markets and these kind of things in southern Wisconsin. Yet that's not being regulated. And so there's lots of things out there that are already a risk. So I can see in some ways why a guy would say, well, with all these other risks we're taking, why worry about the venison? And I think, well, yeah, you could take that approach. I'm not going to argue that you're being irrational because it's a fair point. But the thing is, though, we don't know really how this disease spreads. Is it something that has to get into our system and sit there a while? Is it something that we can pick up through eating? And that's what makes this disease all the more troublesome, is that they have done some tests where the prion doesn't infect the first animal it gets into, but once that animal passes along to the next animal, then it becomes infectious. And so all these things could be changing, and we just won't know about from our generation. As slow as this thing's being, it's not like our country's throwing a whole lot of money at the research on this.
No, not at all.
Yeah, and I guess that's the one thing. We talk about. Is it farmers, the watering holes? You mentioned gardens and things of that nature. It's what's the ticking time bomb? What's setting out there the unknown, and where's the money coming from to just start trying to figure some of these things out?
Yeah, so. and that's I know, like right now I know like the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership is working with the National Deer Alliance and other organizations like UDMA to try to find a way to maybe start going to Washington and start lobbying our lawmakers to make them realize this is not a disease we can just let go by. We have to start studying this thing and put more money into it. And it's just, it's really troublesome because, well, the thing I often think about in my lifetime, you've seen hunting go from basically a small game approach where I grew up hunting rabbits and squirrels and a few pheasants and a few grouse, but really small game was the bulk of my hunting, and deer hunting was kind of like the big leagues where a couple times a year you go out and take your swing at for the fence. But now for a generation here at least, a lot of kids, the first thing they kill is a deer.
That's right.
And that's where we've really gone with hunting. But the thing I'd say is, well, if you've done it before, we could do it again. But I think those were all products of a different era. And people, the thing I point out to people is that I grew up with a dad and his mother who lived in the same house with us growing up, and they came through the Depression where any kind of meat was a bonus. So killing a rabbit back in the Depression was a big thing, and those values were passed along to people like me, their kids, making kind of. It wasn't that long ago for them where they really valued a few squirrels and a few rabbits on their supper table, and now it's become an afterthought basically.
Oh yeah, we can run down to McDonald's and grab a burger. I mean, it's that what I call the microwave society where there's not really a lot of effort put into things. It's just go get it. So, yeah. I hear what you're saying. So, but a lot of great discussion tonight about this.
Absolutely. And Pat, if anybody's interested to come out and see more of your writings and that, where can we find you?
Yeah, if they go to Patrick Durkin Outdoors, I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Patrick Durkin Outdoors. And definitely follow me. I post my columns every week. I try to post my magazine. When I have a magazine piece out, as soon as it's available online, I post it on there. And I'll be launching my own regular website too, where I can post everything, links to everything. So at Patrick Durkin Outdoors, and I love hearing from people. So many people get my name out there. I appreciate it.
Well, I'll tell you what, we appreciate you sitting and taking an hour plus now out of your time on a Sunday evening.
No problem. I like talking to you guys.
And hopefully we'll bump into each other again and spend some time at ATA
I
as well.
am sure we will bump into it. I will find you at ATA. That's usually my mission.
I'm always there, Danny.
I know you are, and it's one of those things. I know you're busy because I usually try to find you, and you're like, I'll see you often running down a hallway or something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing. I figure if I'm swamped, someone's keeping me busy.
Well, and that's the way that show runs anyway, so that's good stuff.
Definitely.
That's a young Patrick Durkin in that picture.
That's a young Danny Default in that picture.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, are you looking at the Deer and Deering cover?
Actually, it's the picture that you sent. My wife texted me the picture that you sent me with your writing on it about being a Lions fan. About the one, it's the one we took up on the hill.
Oh, okay. I think I know what you mean. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
What bow do you shoot now?
I'm shooting. I just got the newest bear bow this year.
Okay.
I bear archery has always been kind of in my bloodline. I killed my first deer with a bear grizzly recurve back in 1973, and so I've always had kind of a soft spot for the bear archery company.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So we'll have to get you back on after the season, maybe after the new year, after ATA, see what happens there.
Keep me in mind.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, we appreciate you taking a little bit of time out, and we'll let you go. So
great. Thanks, you guys.
Yep. Good luck to you this season.
You too.
All right. Take care.
Yeah.
All right. Good discussion tonight.
Absolutely.
Great discussion.
It's always good to have Pat on and
absolutely
kind of find out what's going on in Wisconsin and Idaho, Arizona, where he's been, and
right on.
Imagine that you finally shoot an elk and it falls into a hole.
Right. Hey, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to wrap up the podcast right now. We'll stay on the live stream for just a few minutes. Actually, I can see Pat still in the window here, so if anybody's got any quick questions, throw them our way real quick. But that'll do it for us this week on the podcast, folks. Take care. And for those of you on the live stream, Pat, I'm going to bring you back up real quick here, and we'll see if anybody's got any questions.
Okay.
So, yeah, right, just as we're talking here, we are still streaming live, but if anybody's listening, we get a big following right now. The CWD is just a huge deal here in Michigan, and trying to get a handle on it and really figuring out how the DNR is going to address it, how the hunters are going to address it, and it just seems like I always equate, Danny testified to this, is if you put enough of us in the room together, we'll start throwing toys at each other in about 5 seconds. It just, it's a mess, and it's amazing how one thing can cause so much division, between people who love the outdoors. And we all got the same common goal. We all want, good hunting, and we want healthy animals and a healthy herd.
And with that here in Michigan, the numbers are, I saw an article that said they've tested 31,000 deer, and 58 have come back with CWD positive. So that gives you a percentage of 0.001 something. And a lot of people see that and go, okay.
And other people go, it's knee-jerk reaction time, let's kill all the deer. So, where's that happy medium at, I guess,
Yeah. Well, the thing I keep in mind is if you keep testing the areas where you don't think you'll find it, you will get a very low percentage when you add them all in there. But if you concentrate all your efforts in those hot areas, then you'll get a much higher percentage. So, but if you don't test those other areas, you don't know for certain if the disease is there or not. So you can never say for certain that the disease isn't somewhere until you actually go and test. There's parts from Wisconsin that, despite the fact we've had CWD in our state since 2001, at least that we know of since 2001, there's still parts of Wisconsin that haven't been tested in over a decade. So, and then last year we had a guy that just because he knows they haven't been testing his area. I think it was a son that shot one by Rhinelander, not too far from the Wisconsin River, actually right on the Wisconsin River, right off the Wisconsin River. And then they went and tried to get a few more deer out of that area for testing. And of the 10 deer they shot, they found one more positive in that little area. And so, and this is an area that was at least 75 miles away from the nearest known case of CWD. So it makes me think if I were the king, we'd be setting up a larger scale operation that would rotate around and check these other areas out just to keep monitoring it. You just can't assume it's not there.
I tell you what, last year up in the UP when I was up there for my bow hunting and rifle, they were running PSAs like you wouldn't believe on the radio about bringing deer over from out of states and what you need to do.
Yeah.
And literally you got the impression that they were scared. It was I talked to the butcher where I had Kelly's deer butchered up, and he says if it gets over here, we're in trouble.
Oh yeah, and that's you hope they're scared because they should be, because it really will. The one thing we know is that it's much easier, and that's not easy. It's easier to deal with it if you don't have it. You can keep it away from your areas, and so that's why I'm happy to see how many states have shut down the transportation of carcasses, the entire carcasses back in the states from known CWD areas. Yeah. And they've been cracking down on the game farms, moving deer around. You guys might find this interesting. I live about 7 miles away from a game farm that last November had 12 positive cases of CWD show up in bucks on the game farm, and 11 of those 12 bucks came from the same game farm down in the CWD area. And the question I raised in my column is, how can we as a state allow private citizens to haul deer from a CWD contaminated area and release them into a fence operation up here in central Wisconsin, and then let people shoot them inside the fence? And so they had these 12 cases. 11 were from a known CWD area, and the 11th was from a game farm out in Pennsylvania. And so these kind of things just should infuriate us, that our government's allowing private citizens to move these kind of deer around.
That's right.
And so we're finally shutting that down, and of course that's making people mad who are in the game farm business. But I don't think it's fair that the game farm industry should have any part in jeopardizing the wild deer herd. And the wild deer herd provides many more jobs, much more recreation than the private sector ever has.
Yep.
Well, something else to think about that somebody messaged me this week on that's happening here in Michigan, and I don't know if it is over there, and I don't even know how it's handled from state to state, basically in a county by county basis here, that nobody's really thought a whole lot about, or maybe they have, and it's not been public knowledge yet, is car deer accidents. Okay, so we're heading up north. I mean, it's a 2.5 hour drive for me, and I can probably count 20 or 30 from here to there.
Yeah.
Well, each county handles their deer carcasses differently, but most of them, there's no rule, rhyme, or regulation as to what they do with them. And we found out, a person found out that in one of the CWD zones, they're taking them and dumping them on land and just dumping them and leaving them. And if CWD is that important to us,
yeah.
and we've got known deer that are dead on the side of the road, how do we dispose of those in a manner that's safe?
Well, there's some real inconsistencies out there. Like the area where our CWD is worst, there's businesses down there that the garbage disposal companies that pick up people's trash cans that will not take deer bones. And you think, well, how are these people supposed to responsibly dispose of deer bones if the company they're paying to haul their garbage won't take deer bones? So basically, a lot of people get around by hiding it, and they put it inside a plastic bag where people can't see into it. But it just strikes me as, how can we allow this to happen where we're trying to get people to be responsible, and then they're making it so hard for them to act responsibly?
There you go.
Well, we've had some landfills up here that won't take the deer carcasses from the counties. Same reason.
Right.
It's like, well, to me, that would be the perfect place to put it, because those all have containment systems, and they're not going to get out of there. They're going to be buried in there, and they're going to stay there from now till eternity.
But no,
especially when you think about some of the really bad stuff that get put in the landfills that we know.
Right?
Gosh.
Yeah, and they're worried about a deer.
Yeah, I find that just some of the reasoning there, you really have to do backflips to justify it.
Yeah, it's maddening. Well, I tell you what, we're going to let you go this time for real, Pat.
Okay.
We're going to wrap up everything here on our end as well. But thanks again for taking time out of your weekend to hang out with us for a few minutes, or for an hour actually. We really appreciate it. But we'll see you at ATA. You take care now.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to. Brent Jackson just joined in. Brent, you joined in at the very end.
Last click.
You're going to have to go back and watch here on Facebook. So we're going to wrap up the show. It's been a great hour and a half. Yeah, hour and 27, 28 minutes. So a lot of good discussion tonight, talking about hunting, talking about out west, do-it-yourself elk hunt, CWD, West Nile, the whole 9 yards. Writing, yeah.
How hard it is nowadays. Like you said, that was one of the interesting things that he said was they didn't see it coming.
And I don't think anybody. I mean, the wave of what social media and the internet has done. In my industry, television industry. I mean, that's what we're doing here, on a small scale,
right?
Putting out a broadcast. I mean, it's made it possible for us to be able to do this and talk to people not only in the United States but across the world, about different things.
Charles Byron from Iowa.
Yeah, getting questions answered live. So it's the technology's really taken off. But we're going to wrap it up for the live stream here. So we'll be back again next week. Y'all take care now.